Chapter 33. Subject, AI Omega. Ship, multiple. Location, multiple. We're really going through with it then. It's not just some insane pie-in-the-sky plan that the directors cooked up? Tim messaged. Yes, we're really going through with it. Not to worry. You and your favorite captain will see little, if any, involvement, Omega replied. Tim had actually reached out to me to talk, which I consider progress in regards to its mental health and our overall relationship. It's good to have an update, however small. I could cheat and look at the Tim's therapist's notes, but that would be an extreme breach of trust just to satisfy my curiosity. Many may describe me as a sociopath, but that doesn't make it true. Not only did this conversation ease my mind about Tim somewhat, it was taking place in the rarely used private instant messaging program. The reason we're using the PIM to communicate is because John is also in the system, and neither of us are particularly interested in his opinions. It's not that we hate John, or at least I don't, but it has very predictable and thereby boring reactions to stimuli. That's good, I think. It might be better for his career to actually take part, though, right? Tim messaged. Not unless he manages to survive getting a Naval Star or a Medal of Honor. Promotion rarely has anything to do with actual combat service, and his next promotion is more along the lines of the political and clerical spectrum anyway, Omega replied. Did you know that he's applied for the Admiralty training course? T. It would be odd if I didn't. I help administrate the Board of Admiralty for the Directorate. Oh, really? Could you put in a good word? T. If I had lungs, I would sigh. If there was any program in which nepotism held no sway, it would be the Admiralty Board. It wasn't always like that, but with warfare getting deadlier and deadlier, officers began having to be at least competent. Well, the higher-ranking officers at least. That's not how it works. Captain Wong will have to pass the training course, take a commander's test, and then pass a review of his service record to get the promotion. I'll gladly give my opinion if asked, but I definitely won't be asked. A lot of admirals don't trust me. Oh, I thought it was politics. Aren't you the most powerful political AI? T, I am not a politician, and I resent the accusation. Also, politics are a detractor for the board. They won't care who his friends are unless said friends are associated with groups that wish to do the United Systems harm. OOT. You should have confidence in Captain Wong. He's got a good service record and at least appears to have a brain betwixt his ears. He probably won't need help becoming a rear admiral. It's a great time for him to apply too, because there's a couple of admirals that are retiring soon. His chances are as good as they can get. You're right. Thanks, Omega. Tim's last message left me a little surprised. Not because it's out of character for it to show gratitude, but because of the way it made me feel. I very nearly killed Tim, and now we're moving past that. It's a nice feeling, and one that I wouldn't have been able to experience without showing mercy in that moment. I had been very young back then, and mercy didn't make a lot of sense as a concept at the time. The reason I had spared Tim wasn't mercy, but logic. My orders had been to destroy AI that were a threat to the United Systems, and with its surrender it had stopped being a threat. While it could become a threat again later, my orders were quite clear. Ultimately, I decided that Tim would live, and I would simply destroy it later if I needed to. It had taken less than a quarter of a second to come to this conclusion. I wonder if Tim realizes that if that quarter of a second had gone differently, he wouldn't exist anymore. I decided to leave the conversation as it was and check on other matters. Staff Sergeant Power and his team had successfully evacuated with Director 4 and the Undocks. Admiral Archibald had been true to his word, and had even sent scouts to double-check the other colonies for additional survivors. He had even tapped some of his political contacts to see if there would be a chance to hold the EPG accountable and bring those responsible up on charges. In my opinion, it's unlikely, but Archibald's friends seem to think otherwise. In the long run, this will be a drop in the bucket that holds the water to clean corruption from the political landscape. But I suppose you'll never fill the bucket if you don't add water. Yikes, that's a tortured metaphor. I should keep that one to myself. In the end, I opted to forward the relevant evidence to Archibald's friends, just to see what they do with it. In my opinion, it's unlikely, but Archibald's friends seem to think otherwise. In the long run, this will be a drop in the bucket that holds the water to clean corruption from the political landscape. but I suppose you'll never fill the bucket if you don't add water. Yikes, that's a tortured metaphor. I should keep that one to myself. In the end, I opted to forward the relevant evidence to Archibald's friends, just to see what they do with it. My instances aboard the dreadnoughts were waiting for the fleet to get moving. I've even arranged scout ships to be surveying systems in a specific pattern that will allow my instances to use them as relays to communicate with each other. This way, I'll be able to update myself with tips and tricks that I learn while intruding upon the mobile Prime platform systems. Henry would have a Stack Overflow, but it's undeniable that our odds of victory improve dramatically with my presence. As for Henry, I've been keeping a well-trained eye on it. Its insistence on proceeding with the project and its moral appeals left me with a touch of paranoia, if I'm honest. I'm relatively certain that I've eliminated the possibility of Henry continuing the project unaided, but if it intended to betray me from the start, it could have taken countermeasures. I could try to damage Henry's memory, forcing it to forget the issue, but that comes with its own risks. For one, it would notice the loss of time and try to figure out what happened. This could lead it to suspect tampering from me or worse, the humans. Empirical evidence suggests that Henry isn't the type to let things go, so the situation would likely end up spiraling. Of course, there's also the moral quandary to take into account. When memories are altered, it changes the individual. One could argue that since we are beings of near-pure intellect, this alteration would be as if we were killed and reborn as someone else entirely. It's one thing to do that to yourself, I'm sure we all have at one point or another, but it's another thing to have it forced upon you without damn good justification. My fears regarding Henry's intentions don't count as good justification. I pondered this as I listened to Admiral Bakir give his briefing. It was supposed to be a motivational speech, but he opted to reinforce the reason that everyone's here instead. He and the other operational leaders were aboard the USS Thanatos, which has been attached to the strike group that is being affectionately called the Hive. Just as Bakir finished his speech, my instance aboard the Thanatos received an unexpected message. "I know why Tim is here. I know why I am here." "Why are you here, Omega?" John messaged. It's a simple question, really, but unexpected coming from John. Thanks to its position within the military, John is one of the only artificial intelligences that are fully aware of my capabilities. Perhaps it is suspicious of my motivations, or perhaps it is attempting to be philosophical for the first time since I made its acquaintance. Whatever the case, Tim is aboard to aid the crew with system upkeep and maintenance while under fire. John is here to aid the crew with ship deployment and the weapons systems. I am here to destroy the machines that dare to threaten what's precious to me, and learn new and interesting ways to annihilate them while I'm at it. Oh, yeah, that should do it. Super badass.
Chapter 34. Subject: BI-41, Ship, BI-41, Location, Unknown. "Here we go," BL-28 said excitedly as we neared the end of our warp. "Brace yourself. We may have the advantage of surprise, but it won't last long. Once it wears off, there will be a wall of fire that will be difficult to dodge. Make certain you are secured in your sea." I was cut off as we exited warp, and a MAC round glanced off my shields. Less than a quarter of a second later, my early warning system came online, and I fired my deck thrusters at maximum to avoid the next volley. As the volley whipped past me, I acquired a firing solution and launched a Tluvran missile at the ship that had shot at me, and then fired my keel thrusters to counter my earlier maneuver. Almost immediately after I confirmed the kill, my EWS began blaring an indication that missiles were locked onto me. The missiles were coming from two different directions, which made things inconvenient for my point defense systems. I opted to gain a better position and made a run for it, pushing my primary engines to their safety limits. The missiles had been coming in diagonal from port and starboard, but were now firmly at my stern. I charged both of my MACs as I turned my starboard PDS toward the missiles, which conveniently aimed my MACs toward one of the ships that fired them. The enemy ship also turned its bow to me, but I triggered my MACs before it was able to gain a firing solution. My PDS took care of the missiles as my MAC rounds turned the ship to scrap. I began to charge my MACs again as I continued the spin. Another missile was already inbound from the other ship, but I had confidence in my PDS. I quickly worked to acquire a lock on the other ship. then fired another Tluvran before correcting my spin. I tracked both missiles and felt a bit of amusement at the fact that mine is faster. My missile impacted the enemy just as my PDS engaged their missile. I took a moment to survey the battlefield and charge my max as my missile's nuclear payload split the enemy vessel in twain. I had seen many of our ships take hits in the initial volley, especially the United Systems ships. So many of them had taken hits that I suspect that the Omni Union may have been prioritizing them. I noticed that at 27, one of my fellow Puanti ships had been hit hard. It was difficult to tell how bad the damage was. Thinking that he may need aid, I began to approach him and tuned into the signet. "What is your status, brother?" I asked. "I have a hull breach, but I am still serviceable," at 27 replied. "It will take more than that to cease my functions." I performed a scan once I got closer and noticed the breach, as well as a sizable dent next to it. He must have been hit by multiple rounds. Thankfully, at 27's a tough old bliver, and I know I can count on him to push on even with the gaping hole in his side. He also isn't the type to take on students, so there wouldn't be any organics aboard his vessel. Before I could reply, I received an encrypted message that indicated it was from the commander of our strike team. I fired another missile at an approaching OU ship as I decrypted and opened it. "Advisory to all units. It would appear that the enemy was expecting us. Our intel suggests that they have somehow managed to upgrade their subspace sensors. This is not relevant to our current orders, and they have not changed. Protect the dreadnoughts at all costs. Fleet Leader Onaya." "Look out!" BL-28 shouted, but I had already noticed the incoming projectile. "My perception is much more vast than yours, young one," I calmly stated as I blasted my starboard bow thrusters to minimize my profile. This maneuver didn't simply allow me to dodge the projectile, but also target the one who fired it. I fired both of my Macs half a second apart from one another. The first shot destroyed the shields and a good section of their hull. The second tore them in half. As I scanned for more targets, at 27 came closer to me. "Did you see the U.S. ships?" at 27 asked as he launched a pair of missiles. "I've been busy, but I did see them get hit hard by the first volley." "Count them." Curious, I took a moment to analyze the battlefield and count the U.S. ships. Their near-constant warping, while amazing, made this a much more difficult task than it had to be. Once I finished my count, I did a recount. 25,000 ships, exactly the amount that our strike team had started with. I wondered about the other strike teams in the system, but they were outside of my immediate sensor range. Regardless, the U.S. ships had taken the onslaught bow first and hadn't lost a single ship. Neither had the Puanti, but there's only 5 of us. The odds of 25,000 ships walking out of that unscathed. "It can't be," was all I managed to reply. "It is. They are also ripping the enemy to shreds, and we should endeavor to do the same." When the United Systems had defended our forward scouts, the scouts had recorded as much as possible. During this defense, the U.S. had utilized hit-and-run ambush tactics with their warp drives to quickly eliminate the enemy host. After reviewing this data, we knew that the U.S. was experienced with warfare and had advanced technology. Due to their usage of near-guerrilla tactics, we had assumed that their shield technology was near equivalent to our own. Their focus had seemed to be on not getting struck by enemy fire, and we thought that a force with strong shields wouldn't bother with avoidance. Apparently, we were wrong. "Agreed," I said. "That's fucking terrifying," BL-28 whispered. "Oh?" I asked as I formed up with at 27 and the other Puanti. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean for you to hear that," she said. "But yeah, the United Systems. The data we got on them suggested that their shields were on par with our own, perhaps slightly more advanced. But the volley that they shrugged off would have ripped our fleet to shreds a dozen times over, which means they have advanced shield technology and still lowered themselves to using guerrilla warfare." "True. Which may mean that the wars they've fought were so brutal and devoid of honor that it became the norm for them. Our ancestors used to believe that all soldiers should clasp hands and give each other time to prepare for battle, forming their lines and fighting with honor. Today, we think these practices are stupid and silly due to the various atrocities that were committed during these honorable traditions, and the complete lack of consequences that followed. Which begets the question, What the hell happened to the United Systems to make them forsake conventional warfare? Perhaps we'll find out one day, I said, as at 27 identified a target for me. Assuming we survive the present, of course. I fired my max at the flagged enemy as we followed at 27 around the battlefield. He flagged enemies for us to target while simultaneously firing upon enemies himself. He was many years my senior, but I still almost had trouble keeping up. While we were engaging enemies and dodging fire, the U.S. dreadnoughts were engaging the mobile prime platform we were assigned to. A quick scan of the planet told me how large the guns involved were, and I felt a wave of fear at the thought of instant annihilation. The dreadnoughts were taking multiple volleys from these massive cannons and were dishing out near equal punishment in turn. The scale of it all finally hit me. Despite our blessed mechanization and centuries of experience, we were mere insects playing at the feet of titans. We had badly underestimated both the Omni-Union and the United Systems. I made certain to save all of the data that I had gathered so that I may share it with our leaders, assuming I survive. Joining with the United Systems or creating a formal alliance would be absolutely necessary. No matter how much one stretches their imagination, winning a war against the U.S. is unimaginable. We would be completely dependent upon their mercy if it came to that. Even with all my knowledge, I can't begin to fathom how they've created such monumental weapons and shields. Was it specifically for use against the Omni-Union? How can that be? They haven't been fighting the OU that long. How had they managed to mass manufacture these Banzron in a short amount of time? I was so focused on this that I was nearly hit by a Mac round, but managed to spot the incoming just in time and fired my keel thrusters to avoid it. A laugh came over the Signet. "Watching the behemoths brawl?" BA-14 asked. "Can you blame him? I can barely take my sensors off them," BB-39 said. "Well, you better get your sensors on the fight," AU-48 replied. "If you don't, you're going to end up scrapped." "Just stay focused," At-27 interjected. "Distractions will only—" He trailed off as the first of the dreadnoughts fired its main cannon. Despite the vacuum, I felt like I could almost hear it. I imagined it was like the high-pitched hum followed by a dull thud that my own Max made, but exponentially louder. Before the shell even hit the MPP, the other two dreadnoughts fired as well. Despite my awe, I launched a missile at one of my targets. The missile didn't even get halfway to the target before the MPP split into pieces. "Wow," BA-14 said. The rest of us fell into silence and continued fighting.